Mm. Greetings and welcome back to another episode of When Elders Speak. Please help me to welcome Baba Malik Yakini, a legend based in Detroit around food, farming, music, and so much more. Baba Malik, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what inspired you to be a leading force in the community.
Well, I'm honored if people think I'm a leading force in the community. That certainly has never been my aspiration. But I am a 67-year-old Black man who was born in Detroit, has lived in Detroit all of my life. And I like to think of myself first and foremost as a spiritual being who has manifested in a physical body for the last 67 years. And so, what inspires me is, first of all, my spiritual understanding that I believe that there is some judgment or reckoning after we leave this physical body. We're accountable for what we do, and people perceive that in various ways. But my alignment with what I understand to be right, just, balanced, harmonious, and true is really what motivates me. So on a certain level, I have a personal motivation, which is my own spiritual destiny. And so, I try very hard to align my words and actions every day with, again, what I understand to be right, because my spiritual destiny is tied to those words and actions. But also because I have incarnated as a person that we call a Black person, and I am subject to all that comes along with that, living in a society that is run by white supremacists and is the kind of the inheritor of colonialism. I have dedicated all of my adult life to the liberation of Black people. So I continue to be on that path, trying to do everything I can do to uplift Black people in Detroit, in particular, where I live, but also trying to link with other Black people throughout North America and throughout the world who are trying to throw off the remnants of colonialism, of slavery, and of the mentality that has us beholden to a system that continues to oppress us.
Wow.
To be more specific, though, I also serve as the executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, and we do several things in Detroit. We operate a farm called D-Town Farm, which is a 7-acre farm that uses organic methods. We grow about 40 different crops each year. We operate 2 youth programs, one called the Food Warriors Youth Development Program and one called Food and Flavor. And those programs teach young people first about African cultural concepts, food justice concepts, and about how to build and maintain raised bed gardens, how to harvest the food, how to prepare it in healthy ways. And then the big project we're working on now is called the Detroit Food Commons. And that's a new 31,000 square foot building that we are building along with the development partner that will house the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which we also initiated, a community-owned, Black-led cooperative grocery store.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome. I mean, that's a leading force. That sure is a leading force for sure. So can you share what you feel the key characteristics of eldership are?
It's interesting because in this society where we don't have highly developed rites of passage, many times we find ourselves stumbling from one era in our life to the next. And so we often talk about rites of passage when we're thinking about young people going from childhood to young adulthood around the ages of 13, 14. Mm-hmm. And throughout North America, we've developed many rites of passage programs to help young people make that transition. But life is a continuing series of transitions. And so there's no manual that somebody handed me that says, this is how you move into elderhood. So I'm kind of doing the same stumbling that maybe a 13-year-old is doing, trying to figure out what does all of this mean. So I don't have a definitive answer. I'll share kind of some of what my thinking is. Mm-hmm. At this point. I'm realizing that as you get older, even though I am strong and healthy, I'm certainly not as strong and vibrant, let's say, as I was at 30 years old. Even though I might like to think that in my mind, the reality is that I probably could run faster at 30. I probably could do more push-ups, more pull-ups, all those kinds of things. And so, we certainly try to minimize the decline that occurs to our bodies. Those of us who are health conscious try to minimize that decline. But over time, the human body doesn't last forever. And so you generally see some declining of your physical powers. And so, I'm beginning to see that in small ways. There's, some small aches and pains I have in various parts of my body. But what I'm realizing is that I'm making a transition from being kind of a frontline soldier, who's like in the thick of the work, to becoming more a seasoned general who is most valuable, not necessarily on the front line always, although I'm still willing to do that when that's necessary. But I think my greatest value is being able to derive wisdom and make meaning of the 67 years that I have lived, and to convey the knowledge and whatever wisdom I might have accumulated to people who are younger than me, as a way of kind of passing the baton or passing the mantle to the next generation of activists. And so for me, that means thinking systematically about how I sum up, the last, more than 50 years of activism. And so the next period of my life will include a lot of writing, a lot of archiving of the many flyers and videotapes and audio tapes and posters that I have accumulated over the last 50 years. And again, trying to really derive lessons from that can be shared with others, so that our struggle for liberation continues to grow and doesn't make the same mistakes that we made in the past. So that's part of what, my understanding of moving into elderhood means, at least for me.
There are two things you said that stick out to me when it comes to eldership. One, when you were introducing yourself, you said you understand yourself to be a spiritual being, and you simply just try to move daily in alignment with that frequency, however that looks as a human being. And one thing that has accumulated, just from doing these interviews, is an elder has perfected their identity, or it's a more perfected character. They've been able to shave off some of the stuff that are not in alignment with spirit, and adapt all of the stuff that on. Now you're in the position to kind of help individuals to not just kind of bounce into the next stage, but you can usher them through. So now you're more focused on the wisdom and not so much the physical action. So that's amazing. That's super beautiful, because anyone who goes to learn anything has to tune in to knowledge and wisdom. And then, it's so important. But from your perspective, why are elders such as yourself so important in the community?
Well, let me start by saying that I haven't perfected anything, and I appreciate your kind words, but elders are still in the process of growth and evolution. And that is certainly a lifetime work, and perhaps a lifetime's work. But I would like to think that I am more evolved, more developed, wiser at 67 than I was at 17 or 27 or 37 or 47. So perfection, I think, is a state that we're constantly striving for. And I don't know that we achieve that in this earthly body. But again, certainly we want to continue evolving towards that. So I think you're correct that if those of us who have been honest with ourselves and have been self-reflective and have made an effort to constantly monitor our own behavior and our own words, that yes, we have attained a greater level of alignment as an elder than we did as a younger person. And yes, we have been able to kind of strip off some of the things that don't align with our life purpose and to take on those things and surround ourselves with those things that really support our life's purpose. But I also want to say that there's some old fools too. So just because you're older doesn't mean that necessarily that you have gone through that kind of self-reflective process. But again, for those who are honestly working on their own evolution and developing their character, then hopefully, we pray that we have evolved beyond where we were in our younger years. So elders who had gone through that process are important to the community because hopefully we are the receptacles of accumulated wisdom, not just from our own individual lives, but also, for example, I've had many teachers in Detroit who are now ancestors. And so, for example, many of the activists who were kind of leading Black community activists in the 1960s in Detroit, I've had a chance to sit with, to try to glean some of their accumulated wisdom. And so part of what I see myself doing now is being the holder of many of those lessons and carrying them forward into the future so that I can share those with people younger than myself. And so that's one of the roles that elders play, in a sense. We're a link between the experiences of the past, the experiences of the present, and what our future could be. But elders are also important because life experience tends to allow you to have some foresight. There's an African proverb that says that the old man can see sitting down what the young man can't see standing up. And I want to take that out of the kind of gender specific way that proverb is often thought about, and I'll just say that older people, be they men or women, can see things that oftentimes younger people can't see, simply because of the life experiences that we've had. And so it's important to have that kind of forethought or foresight within a community so that we can sharpen our actions and we don't continue to make the same mistakes generation after generation.
Right.
It's also important because, as I mentioned at the start, one of our primary roles in life is really to perfect or to move towards perfection of our own character and to be concerned about our own spiritual destiny. And so hopefully those elders who have been working on refining our character provide to some degree a model, not a perfect model, but provide a model of what working on your character might look like. And so in that sense, hopefully we provide a positive example for other people in our community. Also, I think to some degree, are holders of the cultural guidepost as far as what is appropriate behavior in our community, what is not appropriate behavior. And we try to, create some parameters within which we can function in a healthy way so that we make progress and we don't allow our own dysfunction to become a debilitating factor.
Exactly. Yeah, we see a lot of that today. I mean, if you're conscious enough to recognize it. But I know you don't necessarily seem to take too much of the honor when it comes to, eldership and what it is that you do or what you bring to the community. But what can the community members do to really honor our elders? What do you think we should do, or how would you want to be honored? What does that look like?
I don't think about that a lot, to tell you the truth, because I think when we start thinking about that, how should I be honored? Or even when we think about how should I be remembered, that's kind of an ego-driven type of thing. So I really don't focus on that. What I focus on is being the best African person I can be, doing the best work on behalf of the community that I can do. And then others are charged with, however they perceive that, responding to it in whatever way they feel appropriate. So if people feel that I've done work which is good work on behalf of the community, then I'm honored that people recognize that. But I really don't spend much time thinking about how I want to be honored or how I want people to think of me, again, because I think at its root, that's kind of an ego-driven way of thinking about things. But I'll say more generally, I
Right.
think it is important in any society that older people, who in some ways are more vulnerable, as I mentioned earlier, typically as we get older, and if you live to be live to be old enough, you begin to lose some of your physical prowess. And sometimes you might become disabled in some ways. And so in that sense, elders can be a more vulnerable part of the population. And so just as we have the collective responsibility of protecting and guiding children, I think the community has the collective responsibility of looking out for the well-being of elders. But I think maybe the biggest tribute that younger people could pay to elders who are involved in the movement is by really internalizing the lessons of those elders and continuing the historical struggle that we've been involved in, and standing firm on those principles so that our movement for liberation continues to move forward.
Yeah, and so I think you touched on this a little bit, but in an ideal world, what role do you see elders playing in a healthy community in an ideal world?
Well, again, they're the conveyors of the accumulated wisdom and culture that they have lived through and hopefully embody. And so I think that is the main role, that they serve as examples and they serve as repositories for that knowledge and wisdom. And they should share it with the community that they're part of so that our culture continues to evolve in a positive way.
So, I mean, like in this day and age, I mean, do we even see our grandparents as elders? I mean, most people just put their grandparents in a home or their parents in a home and they're just kind of moved off to the side and they're not really considered to be a part of anything anymore. So, I mean, as a keeper of wisdom, like what kind of role do they play? Like what is their I want to say like their new position as an elder, if you get me, like physically.
Well, first of all, I'll say that we live in a society that celebrates youth culture. And so you even have elders doing things that would be more associated with younger people because they don't want to fully embrace their eldership and they want to live under the illusion that perhaps they're younger than they are, because eldership is not celebrated in this society. So, part of celebrating elders is really celebrating the circle of life itself, that everything has a beginning, a midpoint, and end, as far as in the physical world I'm referring to that we live in. And so, and I think it's the entire cycle of life or the circle of life that we want to celebrate and embrace. And so we can't, chop off and devalue, eldership, which is an important part of that circle. So that's kind of the preface to my remarks, that we need to break away from the Western culture, which celebrates youth only and doesn't really celebrate eldership. And many times elders are seen as being something just, to sit in the corner somewhere, as opposed to traditional societies where elders, are revered and are seen again as the repositories of knowledge, wisdom, and culture. And so I'm not sure I can really add anything to that answer besides the things that I've already said before about the role that elders play. And, if we want to be healthy communities, we need to embrace all of the circle of life, children. In fact, in many African societies, children are considered to be ancestors returned. And so we celebrate them, but also we celebrate those elders who are closer to ancestorship than we are. and we celebrate our ancestors, and we understand all these things are connected. And so elders become an important link in that whole circle of life.
Right, right. Yeah, lovely, beautiful. So let's kind of flip the script a bit and focus a little bit more on rites of passage. So what is the significance of rites of passage programming for young people in Africa and across the diaspora? So the significance of rites of passage.
So let me start by saying that although I have traveled to Africa on numerous occasions, I have not been part of a traditional rites of passage program on the continent of Africa, and I don't even think that term is used. Mm-hmm. That is a term that we have kind of come up with in the Western world, those of us who live in the West, to try to describe the traditional processes that were in place to help people move from one aspect of their life to the other. Mm-hmm. And so traditional African societies are typically based on age grade societies. There's certain things that are expected of you at certain ages. And in fact, the first time I went to Africa, I went to Ghana in 1995. But one of the things I noticed early on is that girls, for example, who were in elementary school, all had their hair cut in very short, natural styles. And so you could almost look at a girl and tell that, well, she's in elementary school. And then as they got older, they might have had braids and things like that. And then even older women would wear their hair different ways and would wear galays in various ways or head wraps in various ways. And so even the way you show up in the world kind of identifies which age grade you are part of within society. And for each of those age grades, there's certain expectations and certain responsibilities that you have to your community. And so, again, rites of passage is really a continual process within African societies. And it's not just that it happens when you move from childhood to young adulthood, but marriage, for example, might be another rites of passage. Sometimes being accepted into certain orders within society could be a rites of passage. Moving into elderhood could be a rites of passage. Moving from elderhood to ancestorhood is a rite of passage. Birth and the naming of a child is a rite of passage. So all of those things are rites of passage that help us move with greater ease from one aspect of our life journey to the next. And I think they're extremely important, and they're particularly important for those of us who have grown up in the so-called Western Hemisphere, where the processes of enslavement of our ancestors intentionally disconnected us from many of the cultural precepts that previously guided us and prescribed to us what was appropriate and inappropriate behavior. And so as we are trying to kind of almost reconstruct ourselves and reconnect ourselves with traditional African culture, it becomes extremely important that we have ways of systematically moving, particularly our children to adulthood, in a society where almost all of the influence and the influences around them are urging them to be more Eurocentric in their thinking, are urging them to be more materialistic, to be consumers, to be kind of self-absorbed. Mm-hmm. And so rites of passage becomes a way of providing an alternative lens to look at the world through, an alternative set of values, and to reconnect us with the African experience.
Yeah, wow. So how long have you been facilitating rites of passage work, at least in Detroit?
I'm not currently doing that, but for 22 years or so, I ran an African-centered school, and we did rites of passage programs at that school. And then prior to that, I was at another African-centered school, and we did rites of passage programs at that school. So I've been involved in rites of passage on some level for the last maybe 35, 40 years or so.
Wow, wow. And what would you say the most important lesson you've learned doing this work thus far?
I always struggle when people ask me to identify like one singular thing, because I don't really look at life like that. I look at life as an intersecting complex and matrix of experiences. But one of the things that I would say stands out is that for African people in the so-called Western Hemisphere, we have to have this understanding that we were systematically cut off to a large extent from our traditions and our culture. And part of the process of enslavement was to superimpose within us the worldview and the values of our enslavers so that we would be less resistant to enslavement. And that process continues, that seasoning process continues to this day. And so us practicing self-determination, Kujichagulia, us understanding that we have both the responsibility, the right and the responsibility to define what is in our own best interest and to reconnect ourselves with the rest of the African family, I would say is one of the most important lessons that I've learned.
Mm-hmm. So, we look, I don't know if I want to say we look outside or we look online, but wherever everyone is existing right now, in a social space, it's looking kind of crazy. I mean, there's so much going on, so much distractions. What would you tell youth or anyone, someone who's just like in this stuck space and has no idea about culture, but they know this culture is not their own? What do they do? Like, where do they go to start this path back to self?
Well, I would say that you start with yourself, and that all of the wisdom of all time is already inside of us. Mm-hmm. So human beings are a microcosm of the universe. Mm-hmm. And so that's why in the ancient temples of Kemet, mm-hmm. They would say, as above, so below, that you can understand the greater universe by understanding yourself, because all of those principles manifest within inside of you. An atom is like a universe or like a solar system in miniature. And we can find many other ways that the bigger picture manifests within inside of ourselves. And so that truth is already inside of us. So the thing is to begin to strip away the impediments from us connecting with our true God self, or the spiritual aspect of ourself, which is the essence of who we are. I would say that that's the first place to start. And that can include things like reflection, deep thinking, being retrospective, thinking about what has happened in your life to this point, what the influences have been on your life, how you've responded to those things. But then in addition to that self-work, it's very important that we connect with the whole tradition of Black folks in the so-called Western Hemisphere who have been trying to decolonize our minds for hundreds of years. And so we have to study that history of the great freedom fighters who have created various types of templates for us on our journey towards freedom. So, certainly we're not the first African people to think about how we throw off the shackles of colonialism and enslavement and how we achieve self-determination. So we're not starting from scratch. And so studying that legacy by reading books, that now there's an abundance of things on the internet, interviews that folks can watch. But also there are still many elders who are with us who have been involved in our movement, and talking to those elders, interviewing them as you're doing with me today, mm-hmm. and creating a record so that others can benefit from whatever accumulated wisdom those elders might have, I think is another step that people can take towards moving out of the kind of destructive values that dominate Western societies and moving closer to the kind of human-centered values that we need to advance as African people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. And so my last question is, do you have a call to action for African youth across the world? Anything that comes up?
Yeah, so there would be two things. It's almost a repetition of what I just said. One would be on the journey of knowing yourself. both your individual self and all of the aspects of you and why you do what you do, and really clarifying that and trying to move in a clear way. But the second thing is working in conjunction with other African people who are trying to get us out of the situation where we are dominated by Europeans, by Americans, by Arabs, by Chinese, by other groups in the world who perceive us as being weaker because our development was arrested, if you will. And we find ourselves in many cases in the physical world in a less developed, we see ourselves in a less developed way than many other parts of the world. And so we need young people who are dedicated without apology to African liberation, young people who are grounding themselves again in this great tradition of African freedom fighters, both on the continent, in the Caribbean, in North and South America, who are grounding themselves in that tradition and make it their life's work to build African communities, to build self-reliance, to build the institutions that we need to foster self-determination so that we have a free and independent future.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you. And before we close out here, where can people find you? Where can people find your work? If they'd like to support, invest, whatever it is, like here is your time to let everyone know where to find Baba Malik.
Great. Well, so first, I would say people can connect with the organization I'm a part of, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, BBC FSN. And we have a website, which is www.dbcfsn.org. Again, www.dbcfsn.org. We also are on Facebook. We're on Instagram. I'm on Facebook under my name, Malik Yakini, MalikYakini. I'm on Instagram under B Black and Green. Again, BE Black and Green. And there's a bunch of videos on YouTube. If people Google my name, I'm sure many of the videos of talks I've done will come up and they can see those as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Baba Malik. Infinite gratitude. It was an honor having you here today. And guys, any thoughts, comments, just put them right down below and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you so much.